I don't know about you, but this is beginning to feel like a happy place to me. And I'm delighted to be here, to be a part of this series about stories and what stories mean to us individually and in our world. I'm reminded of the closing lines from the psalm that Tom read about seeking and finding. You might be surprised to know that one of the criteria for judging a liar's contest is believability, which the judges, I suppose, interpret however they will. And I always offer a disclaimer here. I did not set out to be a liar. My mama didn't raise me to be a liar. Lying has been thrust upon me. About 12 or 13 years ago, in Austin, Texas, I was invited to be a contestant in a liar's contest. Now, some people think that it is redundant to have a liar's contest in Austin, Texas. And you've already figured out why. But nevertheless, a Barnes & Noble bookstore pressed ahead with the whole idea of having a liar's contest. And I showed up. But I didn't have my heart in it because, as I say, I did not set out to be a liar. So I told an absolute lie. There was not a shred of truth to it, and I only came in third. Well, that's when my competitive nature kicked in, and I began to study about it, and I decided that the best lies I had ever heard started out as the truth. And then at some point you start stretching the truth, and that's when the fun starts. So the next year I told this story. It's a story about my daddy. He had a little farm out south of Brownfield, Texas. That's up in Terry County, about 40 miles south of Lubbock, if you need help with your Texas geography. My daddy liked to grow things. He did. So he had livestock. He had cattle. He had horses. He had chickens. He had geese. He had guinea fowl. He had goat. You name it, he would try it. And it's a farm, right? So he also had crops. He planted cotton out on the back 40. He had alfalfa down in the draw. And every year, my daddy had a great big garden. Now, up by the house, he would plant tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers. But out in the field, he would plant quarter-mile rows of field corn, black-eyed peas, string beans. That was in the spring. In the fall, he planted turnips. Well, and every year, my daddy got his picture in the Brownfield News and Terry County Herald holding the longest cucumber, the biggest turnip. And then one year in the spring, he decided he was going to plant watermelons in between the corn rows. And not just any watermelons either, no, sir. He was going to plant black diamond watermelons. Now, I see some of you nodding. You know about black diamond watermelons. They are not your long, skinny, stripedy kind of watermelons, and they are certainly not those little bitty personal-sized watermelons you can get now in the grocery store. No, sir. They are those great, big, rounded, exactly dark green watermelons, ruby red on the inside, big-hearted watermelon. Oh, they are good. Well, now, your black diamonds grow big anyway. But this one particular melon got to growing bigger and bigger and bigger till pretty soon it was pushing out beyond the corn rows. It uprooted about a quarter acre or so. And it got too big for Daddy to load in the pickup to take it into town and get his picture made with it. So he just called the editor of the newspaper and he said, "You're going to have to come out here this year, fellas. I've got something you got to see." And they did. So there stood my daddy with his hand up on that watermelon. Oh, yeah, it was way bigger than he was. My daddy was 5'9" with his boots off. Well, then my stepmother got to thinking about what it was she wanted to take to the county fair that year in the way of canned goods. She didn't enter the baked goods, but she did love to can. Her corn relish had won the blue ribbon just the year before. Well, she got to thinking, about those watermelons, and she had a real good recipe for watermelon preserves. So she decided to go up to the field, look over the crop. Well, naturally, her eye fell upon that same watermelon that Daddy'd had his picture made with, but she said to herself, she said, "I wonder if that melon is any good. I reckon I better plug it and find out." Well, she had an 8-inch butcher knife with her. So she walked over to that melon. She started cutting out one of those triangle-shaped plugs. But I'm telling you now, the rind on that melon was so thick that when she pulled that plug out, well, it was all rind. There wasn't any watermelon meat on it. So she put her hand in through that plug hole, clear up to her shoulder, and still all she could feel was just rind. And that provoked her some. So she took that 8-inch butcher knife and she started whacking away at that plug hole till it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon it was big enough she could step inside, aiming to get to the heart of that watermelon. Well, now, you know, I think everything would have been all right if there hadn't been, well, just a little slope to that field. So some of you are getting ahead of me. So there already being some strain on that watermelon vine, what with that big old melon on it. When my stepmother added her weight to it, it was just too much for that little stem, and it just popped right off, and the next thing she knew, she was just rolling head over heels, over head over heels, inside the watermelon. Well, that melon rolled on down out of that cornfield. I took out, an acre or two, and then it rolled on down. It took out about a half a mile of fence post. It finally bounced on over onto the county road, and it was on its way to town. Well, Daddy was outside when he looked up, and he saw this melon rolling down the road, and he could hear his wife's voice coming from inside. She was hollering, "The heart, the heart." And he thought she was having a heart attack. So he jumped into the pickup, pushing the case of canning jars he'd bought that morning at the Piggly Wiggly over to one side, and got in behind the melon. Well, that county road made kind of a little bank and turn there as it came into town. And it just kind of kicked that melon right on over onto Highway 82, and she was on her way to Lubbock by way of Meadow, Ropesville, and Wolfforth. Well, that melon was just rolling down the middle of that highway. It was forcing cars and pickups and 18-wheelers off into the bar ditch. It was mowing down mailboxes and Burma shave signs. And Daddy was doing his best to keep up. Meanwhile, now, in behind him were falling in police cars and ambulances and fire trucks, and there was even one of those traffic helicopters flying overhead. So all Daddy had to do to keep up to the minute reports was just turn on the radio. The runaway melon is approaching Lubbock at a very high rate of speed. It is headed right toward the South Plains Fairgrounds. They've evacuated the Midway, and the exhibits area is on high alert. Well, fortunately for everybody concerned, as the highway goes through Lubbock there, it makes a gentle little curve. And, well, the melon didn't quite negotiate the curve, and so it bounced on over right into the middle of McKenzie Park, actually right into the middle of Prairie Dog Town, which is a major tourist attraction in Lubbock, Texas. And no animals were hurt in this part of the story. That melon just started rolling across, all these little prairie dog holes. And they acted just like hundreds of little speed bumps. So they started slowing that melon down, so that by the time it rolled on over onto the South Plains Fairgrounds, it just stopped, just as docile as you please, right in front of the food exhibits building. Well, Daddy came screeching around the corner, still thinking his wife was having a heart attack. And he said, "Are you all right, sweet thing? Do you need CPR?" Well, she came crawling out of that melon, all red in the face and spitting seeds. She said, "No, I'm all right. I just wish I had my canning jars, because I don't think I'm going to have time now to get my preserves made." Daddy said, "Not to worry. I got a whole case of jars right here in the pickup. All you have to do is scoop out some of the heart of that watermelon, stir it up in those jars. You don't even need to add sugar. You know how sweet those black diamonds are. Put a cap on it, you're going to win a blue ribbon for sure." Well, she pulled herself up to her full height, brushed herself off as best she could, did exactly what he said to do, and by doggies, she did win another blue ribbon. And you know, I think now that the melon would have won a blue ribbon too if it hadn't had so many miles on it. Well, that's the one that won me the first title as the biggest liar, first in Austin. And then later I recycled it and won the first of the state contests. And the point I want to make about that story is, as my husband likes to say, it's about 90% true. My dad really did have a farm. He really did try all of those different kinds of livestock and plant all those different crops. He really did have a big garden every year. And he loved attention. So anytime he had any oversized, odd-shaped fruit or vegetable, he would take it down to the newspaper office, get his picture made with it, clip it out, and send it to me wherever I was. My stepmother had been a registered nurse. She hated to cook, but she loved to can. I always thought she just still liked to sterilize things. So here was the sort of seeking and knowing part of that story. It's based on an old folk tale about giant fruits and vegetables. There are lots of those. But the characters I chose are real people. And by providing the backstory for that folk tale, I realized some things about them. Small things, but particular things. And special things, really, because I didn't live with my dad past I was 9 years old. So these discoveries, because I was looking at him in a new way, to put him in a story was a way for me of seeking and knowing him better. And we do that with stories. We know ourselves better, we know others better, even fictional characters, even those stories that we grew up with as children. We begin to know about these people. And the situations themselves, the description of the farm and the highway, all of those are real moments for me. I was going to tell you another story about my son and his wife, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to kind of abbreviate it here, Tom, and say that later I moved on to talk about real situations. And our son and daughter-in-law just provided 1 million of them because they just do bizarre things. And so I tell the story about our son and his swamp fox that he was going to put together and get out on the lake, and that becomes a conflict with our subdivision, the property owners association. And you figure those kind of stories then become universal, because if you've ever had a son, been a son, known a son, lived in a subdivision or a neighborhood that's just infested with rules, you know how those conflicts happen. And those are shared. Those are shared moments, which is exactly the kinds of connections that stories make. The sacred stories that Tom was talking about, these secular stories in sacred moments, can bring us together in ways that are unique, I think. And so it's been my pleasure to be part of this service and this series. And I'd love to come back every week. It sounds like it's just going to be quite a lineup. And thank all of you for coming and indulging us in this bit of fun in a happy place. Thank you very much.